Hey guys, what is up? AwesomeTheSauce here. Hope you guys are having a great day and welcome to the much requested tier listed PvP video. I have done every wizard in PvP now, all 7 of them at max. A lot of things have changed since the last meta. We don't have Solar Surge, there's tons of new spellements, there's tons of new gear. Basically, there's been a gigantic shakeup in the meta, so I thought I would rank the schools from worst to best at max PvP. So without further ado, let's get right into it. I'm gonna start with what I think is the worst school at max level 150 PvP right now. I think almost certainly at the bottom of the list for me anyways. I mean, again, you guys can disagree. I think Death is by far the worst right now, and that's mainly because all the things that I mentioned really did not benefit Death that much. The thing about Solar Surge is that when you put it on drains, what it did was it didn't just make you have more damage on the hit, it also made you drain a lot more on the hit, right? So this enchant wasn't just worth the 300 that you put on the Wraith, it was worth the 150 heal back that you got extra as well. Before they got rid of Solar Surge, all you really had to do was strike and Wraith a few times and maybe throw in a hidden bubble, and you were basically going to be good no matter what. Now, honestly, that wouldn't matter because a well-timed drain will still win you the game, especially if you know, if you're defended, if you have bubble control. There's all kinds of scenarios where a Wraith is still an extremely good move. But I think the real thing holding Death back is the fact that their spellments are just really, really bad. I think the weakness on Dark Sprite is literally not worth it. The utility on Ghoul is, in my opinion, kind of worthless, mainly because if you wanted to remove an overtime, you actually have spells that can already do that, and instead of getting a really, really irrelevant drain for the 3 pips, you could actually get something better, like a shield, for example. So I think the bottom path for Ghoul is also ridiculous. These little overtime heal utilities, they're generally very situational already, but also you already have spells that turn overtime heals into shields as a depth. You don't need any of these. Nothing else will compare to that spell. The merciless gear does give depth a lot more pierce than other schools, which is kind of a silver lining because, you know, if you infoul and drain a lot, you actually do get something for it. That being said, I just don't think the base damage on most death spells are good enough to make that extra pierce worth it, and I just don't think they're compensated in utility by spellments other than maybe Banshee and maybe Wraith. It's still definitely a playable school. It's just much, much worse than other schools for all the reasons I outlined. So without further ado, let's go into number 6. There's not much more to add. It's kind of garbage. Number 6, I'm gonna have to go with Life. And I know that's a surprise entry because honestly, Life is not a bad school right now. I actually love playing on the Life. Life got a lot this update in terms of spellments, right? I mean, we got a shift spell that literally hits, which is probably the best spell right now, I would say, that any school's ever gotten that they didn't have before. And you also have a hit that blades you if you have over 50% HP, which, considering how much HP that Life has, it's a very easy spell to use. There's a very different reason why Life is very close to the bottom of this. It's not because they have bad spells or even bad stats. It's really none of that. Compared to every other defensive school, Life just doesn't have an edge anymore. When you're looking at maybe balance, when you're looking at maybe ice, when you're even maybe looking at depth, right? Those schools actually get compensated for the fact that their stats might not be as good, because they actually do get very, very good hidden shields. They get very, very good, you know, utilities. When you look at balance, you get drains as a death. Life used to be able to make up for it by healing, right? Like, the whole point of Life is to heal, but they took out healing almost completely, because now, if you have any incoming heals, it doesn't apply on your heals anymore. So if you wanted to heal, your best bet is probably to change your ring to something like, I don't know, the Ring of the Dying Star or something crazy like this. You'd have to give up a lot of damage, and then maybe you would have a little bit of outgoing. And even then, your outgoing is probably not going to be high enough for you to justify healing. So basically, what I'm trying to say is, if you're going against an offensive school, you can probably do just as well as any defensive school. But when you're going against another defensive school, this school, Life, it falls apart really hard. So just in terms of just a lack of actual school identity when it comes to going against schools that are just as defensive, it puts Life at a big disadvantage. It's just a numbers game, right? If 3 matchups are scuffed, then it's kind of scuffed, you feel me? I will say though, Firestorm and Myth, it's a very easy, I think it's one of the easiest matchups in the game right now versus Life. So there is something, it's very extreme, I guess, so there is something there in Life, in my opinion. I think number 5 is Fire, and honestly, I think there's one big reason for this. It's the fact that they're just really, really not an overtime school anymore. Fire did get a lot of utilities that I think are very, very exciting, that are literally based on overtimes like Fire Cat, which detonates. We also have Sunbird, which extends, and you also have Phoenix, which does more damage if your opponent has an overtime on them. Stuff like this makes me very excited because like it's school identity, it works. Phoenix is an extremely fun spell to use. I look forward to maxing this out and using that max 2 Phoenix. I think that's going to be goated. But as exciting as it is, the problem is that now everybody and their mama has access to a shift. If you're life, you can just get Seraph, but honestly, a lot of schools can just get Gearhead Destroyer spellments and run a balance mastery, and most of your overtimes start becoming very foolish. Inferno Salamander becomes extremely stupid because it doesn't even break a shield. So if you're hitting into a shield, not only are you losing a third of your damage, you're also getting shifted the other 2 bits of the damage that you would have done. So because overtimes are so hard to really use well, it makes spells like Sunbird kind of useless. Because why would you extend an overtime that's going to get shifted onto you? Why would you ever do that, right? It's very silly to do something like that. Now, the reason that fire is still above death and life anyways is because honestly, they do have a lot of damage output still. I still think you can go very crazy on, you know, the Ice Wyvern strategy where you pack mutates of Ice Wyvern and regular Ice Wyvern, and honestly, this actually does break a shield as an overtime. So I feel like you do have that as a saving grace, and you can always just use Elf, and I think that's kind of where I'm going with fire in general. I think you can only really use Inferno into this when you're really at the end game, where if they shift, by shifting, you have an open shot that kills them. That's pretty much the only way Inferno Salamander is worth using anymore. Stat-wise, Fire's doing really well. I would say utility-wise, honestly, they did get stuff, which I have to mark them up for. It's just the fact that other schools can overtime shift. It makes it much harder to actually use a proper overtime. I think without a doubt, Storm is number 4, and honestly, it's because their game plan is extremely simple. All you have to do is hit and buff, and if things don't work out, all you have to do is Wild Bolt. I would talk about these spellments, but I don't even think you need to use most of these spellments on a Storm right now. I think the only exception is if you tier up Triton enough and someone overtimes you, you can absolutely bop the living daylights out of them. So I feel like Triton is probably worth getting, and maybe Thunder Snake if you want to pack Sharpens in with max tier, maybe that would work. But honestly, the real thing here is the fact that by removing Solar Surge, you leave the school with the most damage with a lot of options, and that's really why Storm is good right now, right? Removing Solar Surge makes an unsolar surgeable spell like Rusalka, like it hasn't been able to be enchanted for months now. It makes a spell extremely good compared to every other spell. Like 1350 damage on a blade, it's a nutty combo. Not to mention the fact that you can Stormwing for an aura, that you can Beetle, you could hit and bubble. You have so many ways that you can hit and buff right now that you literally can just hit. You can start hitting through shields after a certain point because you have so much damage output. I'd say one underrated thing that really gave Storm a lot is the 6-round Galvanic. This is a menace. You put this up in Elf, you're kind of lit. You're kind of lit at that point. The only reason I'm not putting Storm a lot higher on this tier list, like number 4 is kind of low, is because I honestly think, first off, compared to number 3, which you'll see very soon, I think they're very evenly matched tier list wise. But more importantly, I think there is one obvious thing that holds Storm back, and it's the fact that they do have low HP. I think if someone's warding against you, they have a very high chance of winning to the point where you need RNG to win. And I also think that it's very hard right now to set up an actual Gambit, and I feel like that makes going against defensive schools with ward extremely difficult. So I feel like the fact that people are going to be warding, I'm gonna account for that in this tier list. I assume with the rise of Storm Ward that you might need to set up Gambits in order to do the damage you need to do, and I think the only good spell in that way is Fire Mastery with Thundering Djinn, and you need them to set shield, and you can't always rely on that. Some people are just single Storm shielding instead. Storm is an extremely competitive school. I just think that because it's so good, people are going to ward to it kind of, you know, in a disjointed way. That's why it's number 4 on this list. Let's move on to number 3. I'd say that number 3 is Myth. Now, I'll say this. I think Myth and Storm, you could make an argument as to why one is better than the other. I'm just putting it for the sake of the fact that I do think Myth has a lot more abilities and utilities, so I think they have a slight edge on Storm, but I could totally understand the argument why people say Storm would be better than Myth. Now, keep in mind, I feel like Myth is the most spellment reliant school right now. I feel like if you don't farm farm for spellments on a myth, you're not gonna have a fun time. But when you do, you get a lot of really fun things, right? You actually start realizing that this school is actually kind of cracked a little bit. For one, I think this is my favorite spellment ever. Like, this is very good when you potent it, but it's extremely hype, right? You can break a shield, pip conserve, and put 225 traps on your opponent. Like, that's literally nuts. You can set up anything. And then after you do that, you also have a Minotaur that now does more damage regardless of the school of trap. You just need traps on your opponent. So you can put any sort of trap. You could literally put an elemental trap on your opponent, and if they ever tower shield, you're good to go. Like, you could literally just do a maxed out Minotaur pretty much on the just regularly. It's nuts. When I max tier this, I feel like I'm just gonna be spamming this with like elemental trap, and that's all you really gotta do. It really isn't that hard. That's not all that they have, right? I mean, they have minion game, which is really good. The troll minion is still one of the best minions in the game, and as if that wasn't enough, they also have all kinds of combos with frenzy and mandar, which they literally can get from the robe, they can get from a deck, they can get from a wand. You have more copies of mandar than ever before, and honestly, yes, it's a little bit of a niche strategy because it'll never work against balance, for example, because they aura pop, but it is very good against some schools as a backup plan, and it's an unexpected thing, right? If you can incorporate it into your strategy, you're kind of looking kind of good. I could see people taking myth to the top of the leaderboards easily, which I believe is already the case, but I do think that myth, yes, I'm putting it as number 3. You could honestly be an extremely good myth player and beat any school on this tier list. That's where they're at right now. So I think myth is in an extremely good place. I enjoy playing myth. I hope you guys agree with that one, but let's move on to number 2. I'm putting balance at number 2 right now, and honestly, I'm thrilled about this because I think balance needed this after so long in the gutter, because balance has been getting nerfed for a really long time, and I think for the first time in a while, balance is very close to just playing very different and being good. I wish every school was at the level that balance is. I'm not saying nerf balance in that many ways. I'm saying bring all of the other schools up to this level, because it's beautiful. I mean, where do I even start, bro? I mean, this Hydra, it's amazing, right? You already have Hydra being a shield breaking hit, but if your opponent has a shield, you just get extra fire damage, which is absolutely beautiful. You now have a shift. Mana burn is much better because everyone has more damage and pierce. You have all kinds of anti-trap and anti-blades. You have some gambits that you don't even have to do anything to set up. And as if all of that wasn't enough, in a meta where auras are extremely useful, you now have supernova, and let's not forget, without solar surge, you would think balance doesn't have a good finisher, but judgment is still one of the best hits in the game right now. I would say the only thing that I could like balance got a gear upgrade, very good spellman upgrades. Honestly, the meta favors them in a lot of ways. I'd say the only thing that really didn't work out for them in some ways is some of these spells. I feel like Locust Swarm, swapping traps, I don't think it's a good concept. I'll be honest. I just don't see the point in it. Yes, you can hit when they anti-trap, and as an anti-trap, right? It's amazing. Like, if someone like Mythic feels you, right? What this spell does, it'll swap the traps over, and it'll do 255 myth damage. It's a cool concept, don't get me wrong, but I don't really see this being useful, because after you swap one set of traps, they will go back on you when you use this again. It's a one-time use spell, so it's bad. I don't even know what they did with Scorpion. I would talk trash, but I think it speaks for itself. I don't know why in the world a 3-pip spell does damage, then makes your opponent lose a pip. I don't get it. Like, it's so situational that I don't know how anybody would use this. But I do feel like Gearhead, Hydra, and Spectral are very good. Like, you know, like, just doing extra damage when people do things that they always do. Like, you know, overtiming, blading, shielding. Like, it is really nice. I will say this, I'm not a big fan of the fact that you can literally just gaze, brace, and mana burn, and you just win a lot of games. You might throw in a Hydra here and there, but that is a very easy game plan. So I do think they should look into that. I mean, I guess it's not that big of a deal. Again, if other schools are just as good as balance, you wouldn't need to nerf balance. I think balance is really fun to play. I think it's in a good place. Let's move on to obviously the number 1. I think ice is easily number 1. I mean, they got extremely good gear, extremely good spellements, and honestly, it's very hard to point out a weakness in ice right now. Let's start with the actual stats, right? There's all kinds of setups you can do. One of my favorites to do is run the Highland hat, with the Highland robe, but then you run either Uber boots, which I think work, or if you're trying to just go super offensive, you could also just run merciless boots. And when you look at the stats on these, it gets a little nuts, right? You get absolute tons of damage, absolute tons of accuracy, a lot of resist, right? Like, you get all kinds of, like, off-school resist with the Highland gear, and you don't really give up anything too glaring, right? I mean, you get really good pip conserve, pip chance, accuracy. The Pierce, it seems low. I can guarantee you it's not really that low. You throw in an infoul, it's not low. And as if all of this wasn't enough, they also have extremely good spells. Like, Evil Snowman is a school-specific shield out of a hit, which is crazy. You have this Juicer, which clears a blade and then creates a trap out of it for some reason. You have Colossus, which does more damage if you just have a shield, which why would you not shield as an ice? And honestly, even Frost Beetle is pretty good, right? It's a universal hit and shield for 2 pips. It could get you out of a pinch very, very quickly. I think the only times that I've actually struggled on the ice is when I'm just deck failing like crazy, because otherwise the game plan is literally just to shield a lot and hit a lot, and that's about it. And not to mention the fact that there's TCs that do so much damage for ice that anytime you have an open shot, you just throw out one of these and you're just gonna win very easily. I do think some of these TCs are a little excessive for ice, especially because it's supposed to be a defensive school, but I don't see how a 4-pip spell that does 600 damage is anywhere close to defensive. Add that to the fact that they have 140 damage pretty much like guaranteed. It's a little nuts, right? I mean, an infouled hit is like a death sentence now when you're going against an ice. But the other spells, I think they are balanced, so I don't know. I don't know how exactly I feel about it. It does feel a little bit like easy mode when you have Blue Phoenix and stuff like that, though. But yeah, guys, I think ice is clearly at the top. I don't really think there's even a debate on this. Maybe there's a debate on the other ones, and for that, let me know, y'all. Let me know in the comments what y'all think of this tier list, what you guys think of my reasoning. Do you guys agree? Do you guys disagree? Let me know, of course, in the comments below. As always, drop a like if you enjoyed, leave a sub if you're new, and if somebody has not told you you're awesome today, they doing something wrong, so stay awesome, and yeah.